All right, it's about 3 minutes past the hour, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jason Hines. I'm CEO and co-founder here at Gigasheet, and I'm joined by Garth Griffin, our CTO and co-founder.
Hey, folks.
Today, we're going to talk a bit about price transparency and how you can use it to compare and benchmark yourself in the market, and a bit about how our technology works that we've developed. Now, full disclosure, I am not, I have not been in the healthcare industry my entire career. I started as a software engineer in defense and national security. I worked for Google for a while, worked in data analytics, and most recently, before starting this company, I ran a large multi-billion dollar cybersecurity company over the course of a decade. And the common thread between all those random different things is massive amounts of data and making sense of it. Um, and while we're not experts in the healthcare market, most of our customers are. What we are experts in data and how to efficiently process that and gain intelligence from it. And we're going to talk about that today. Garth, I'll let you give a quick intro to yourself and then we'll dive into it.
Yeah, also with the data theme. So I did some work also with Google and with Harvard, and then previously also cybersecurity. And yeah, it's all about, working with there's a lot of data out there, and you can really get some gold out of it if you know what to do. So that's kind of where that's our angle.
Yeah, and we really feel like the healthcare space is super interesting and appealing because there's tons of data and it feels particularly underserved compared to many of the other industries that we've spent time in. So let's dive into it. By the way, we're going to be taking questions, so feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A panel or in the chat. We'll try to get to those at the end, or maybe during the session, but we're here to share and provide information and happy to do so. So a little bit about sort of why we thought this company was compelling and our mission overall always has been this idea that not everyone can write code and use databases and really that they shouldn't have to get answers out of data. Like you think about this price transparency data, I mean, it's supposed to be transparent. It's right there in the name. Unfortunately, yeah, it totally makes sense. Like it's way more transparent than it used to be, but it doesn't mean it's usable, especially not by average people. And even people who are very skilled at working with data, it's complex and challenging. And we feel like, these are barriers that should be broken down. There's all kinds of technology that has evolved to do this, including AI. We'll touch on a bit. Um, this data is a huge mess. There's all kinds of problems with it. First of all, it's massive in just the volume, and we'll talk a bit about that. But there are also a lot of irrelevant data points in this, and it can be very convoluted to work with. And some of that is just the nature of the industry and how it's evolved, and the nature of these systems. And it's not like it's anyone's fault necessarily. I think it's just complex in inherently. But we're working to simplify that and make that a lot more user-friendly and approachable and help people work with this data. I'll give you some more specifics about what I mean. So price transparency data is the theme today, and using it to see where you stand within this mass of data is important and very valuable when you're looking at the market, whether you're trying to do competitive analysis, renegotiate contracts, fill gaps in a payer network, or even look at market access for a device. But just to give you some idea about the complexity of this problem is we're going to look at, in today's demonstration, we're going to look at data from Idaho, just a single state. Nothing against Idaho, but it's not particularly one of the most populated states in the country. But just in Idaho alone, the machine readable files for the major payers are over 1.2 terabytes of JSON, which is the format that this data is in. And after we flatten it, it results in about 34 billion rows of rates, which is a ton of data. But after we run it through our processes, which we'll talk about, which involves removing duplicates, removing zombie rates, which are irrelevant data points, and NPIs that are also invalid or irrelevant rows, it results in 7 gigs or just over 200 million rows of data. Now, in case you're not a math major, that means 99.4, either regardless if you look at it by rows or by like gigabytes of data, over 99% of the data is kind of garbage. So there are tools where you can look at this data on your own, but it's easy to go down the wrong path or to look at when 99% of it's garbage, it's hard to find the gold in there, the 1.5% that we're focused on today. Um, and in addition to that, it's not even like there's a really consistent structure. There's supposed to be CMS is supposed to be announcing improvements to the schemas, but right now there is one schema, and it's much more workable than it was, say, 18 months ago. 2 years ago, this data was, in my opinion, not useful, frankly, or very limited use. But over the last 18 months, it's become much more valuable uh, and useful on a broad scale. Um, there is a defined schema, but there are multiple permissible forms for that, which just adds more complexity to working with the data. And you have situations where you have like a table of contents file that points to many MRFs. And then within those MRFs, sometimes you have to reach out to our URL to retrieve additional information. And there are all kinds of other rate limits potentially on the APIs to fetching this data. There are some interesting things going on, if I'm kind. Um, but basically, once that data is pulled down, we enrich it with a bunch of different sources. So of course, we pull down the machine readable files or MRFs. These are usually in JSON. Those contain the rates and then all kinds of additional details about the rates, like the type of rate, whether it was negotiated per diem, percentage, any modifiers. So maybe this is just the procedure, or the procedure had to be abandoned, and then it's a different rate, or maybe it was a bilateral procedure. Um, it contains a place of service code. So a provider may have a rate in the office, but then different rates for in an ambulatory surgical center, a hospital inpatient, a hospital outpatient, and so on. EIN information or employer IDs are in there. And then other payer information. All this data is completely public, uh, though it's not a particularly easy to analyze. We layer in data from the NPI registry. This is super helpful if you're trying to identify clinical focus area or specialty, contact details or location information, as well as uh, the physician fee schedule, which we'll use to benchmark against Medicare rates in that region or market. Um, and then, of course, claims data, which can be used to derive volumes and also help with removing irrelevant rate pairings, like these zombie rates, where you may see rates for, say, an orthopedist doing heart surgery. They may technically have that in their contract, but we know orthopedists don't do heart surgery. So that's really not relevant information. Um, so once you have all of this data clean and in one place, or in our case, the way we present it is one giant spreadsheet, which makes it particularly flexible and easy to use, you can start to gain insights from it. But all the raw data with all of the features and attributes of it are always accessible. Um, so our platform that we designed is built for big data and designed for speed and flexibility. One of the reasons why this is very expensive work is most other players in the market use an off-the-shelf commercial database or off-the-shelf open source software and run it in a standard cloud environment. Now, we of course use cloud technology and open source software as well, but we've architected a proprietary solution that is incredibly cost effective and fast to process this data and flexible. So you can create reports of whatever form you'd like, integrate the data via an API in a very flexible way. And it's also easy to apply artificial intelligence to this data because of the analytical backend data warehouse that we're using that is purpose-built for really large scale analytics and data like this. Um, so that's a little bit about this. Now we're going to kind of get into a bit more here of how this works. So the way the Gigasheet solution works is we source MRFs and extract, transform, and load that data into our infrastructure. And this can be done, this is often done in batch or on demand. So we can turn around MRFs that are fully cleansed and processed within a few hours. Hospital files can be processed within a few minutes usually. Um, but of course, we have a growing repository of this information that's already been processed, so there's no need to repeat that. We can reuse it and just slice and dice it different ways. So we run it through the cleaning and enrichment steps, like I talked about before, and then we spend a lot of time with our clients analyzing the data, helping them discern and make decisions based on this data with the insights. And like I mentioned, it's often really helpful to be able to drill down to exactly where this piece of information came from and identify why you may see different patterns or anomalies within the data. There are so many features and attributes to it, it can be a lot to wrap your head around. And it's important to take into account all of those different features to get clear intelligence on what's really going on in the market. And then, of course, the data is refreshed on a regular basis as well. Um, Garth, I'm going to hand it over to you, and you can talk a little bit about, why this is so important when sometimes you want to look at modifiers or place of service codes, like I mentioned. Like this is just one of the other interesting attributes of this data. We find it interesting as sort of a challenge, but also helpful to do, and that has to do with the employer identifiers. You want to talk through this screenshot we've got
Yeah,
here?
so Jason's kind of been talking about, we're talking about the challenges with this data, right? And the reason we're talking about the challenges is because, some of you may have tried to work with this data in the past and sort of correctly come to the conclusion that it is hard to get real value out of it. And, so that's why, we offer kind of to be your data partner and help you get the good stuff out of it here. So Jason's talked about kind of some of the technical aspects, like the size of the data and the structure of the data. And we can have, we sort of bring that technical lift to it. But there's another aspect to the challenge of this data, which is even if you've got it all processed and you handled the terabytes and all that stuff, you've come through the ringer on that. The data itself is reflecting a messy reality. And so, that's kind of the point to make here is, so this is an example of something that we see in the data pretty often where and if you say it about the real world, it makes perfect sense. There's a practitioner, in this case, it happens to be a radiologist. There's a practitioner who works at multiple places. This is very, that happens in real life. Somebody who does their services at a hospital and also at a clinic and also whatever. Um, but if you're kind of coming to this data and you're thinking about it like, oh, I just want to get a measurement or I'd like to understand the rates of everybody in a certain geographical area, then that aspect of reality where there are people that are located in multiple places is something that you have to decide, how you're going to work with that. And if you're not kind of looking out for wrinkles like that, it might trip you up in the analysis. So this is kind of the data challenge aspect that I wanted to illustrate it. So what's on the screen here is just an example of somebody's NPI. So, that's a nice clean taxonomy. NPI represents an individual practitioner. And they're the TINs, which are in the rate files. And those are the taxpayer identification numbers of different places where there might be a contracted rate. And so this person's NPI is associated with 6 different TINs. You can see there over on the left. And then in their NPI registry, they've self-reported a location, 250 Northwest Boulevard, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. But if you look at the actual data, there's a whole pile of rates associated with this other EIN, that 132 number at 3100 Channing Way. So, the point here is you can have in the real world, sometimes things are messy and you do see that in the data. And when you're working with these files, trying to get those sort of gold nuggets out, these are the kind of wrinkles that you have to decide how you're going to handle and sort of pay attention to this and make sure it doesn't sort of screw up your measurements or give you numbers that aren't going to really mean what you hope they mean. And all that to say, it's nice to have a data partner, and that's what we can offer is partnering with you to make sense of this data and get you the stuff that, is going to help you make good decisions for your business. So that's data challenges. Um,
It's
and
a
I think
great point. We see this, we recently discovered this a lot with a great example that I like is physical therapist, where we saw some physical therapy providers who had like a whole bunch of EINs, and we're like, what is this data just wrong? Which sometimes is the case in these files, but in this case, it looks like they're kind of moonlighting at different practices. Maybe they work Tuesday and Thursday at one place, and then they work across town at another place. And then they're in some networks, they're an affiliate of an online network or and then they do some in-home care. And it's once you kind of unravel it all, you're like, okay, that actually I could see a physical therapist why they might do that. And similarly, in Garth's example, like he was saying, this is the real. We're trying to model the real world, and whenever you do that, it's going to get complex and messy.
so. I think we can go. We'll go on to our live demo here. I'll show you in our product sort of what it looks like to get one of those gold nuggets, some useful insight out of this data, out of some Idaho data. And the way that in the demo, I'll kind of do it from the perspective of network development. But there's lots of different ways to use this data. And another, probably maybe the second sort of great example to think about is if you're a provider, you probably also care about this. Maybe you want to know about your competitors, get some competitive intelligence. This can inform your discussions with payers and, kind of, it's again, sort of see where you stand, understand what the market conditions are to help you make better decisions. So those are two examples, from a network development perspective or competitive intelligence perspective for a provider. There's other ways as well. But let's look at, we sort of talked about the challenges. We talked about why this data can be difficult and, how we can, sort of help you navigate that. So let's have a look at what that really looks like. So what's on the screen here? This is Gigasheet's interface. So this is our interface for analyzing this data. But again, we partner with you. So if you want to do analysis in our interface, that's great. If you have your own data environment, you want to sort of dump stuff in, we can give you a tailored set of this data to line it up with your schema. We'll help you get it into whatever form you need it. But in the demo here, we're going to be working with it in the Gigasheet interface. So what's on the screen here is kind of where you might land for an answer. And the answer that we're looking at here is a single provider and a single code. And the motivation behind it is, let's suppose that I work in network development for network, and we're feeling like we really need to up our game in Idaho with gastroenterologists. We feel like we're not competitive. We're not getting the kind of we don't have the strength there that we'd like to have, and so we want to go out and do a little recruiting. We want to try to get more providers in that specialty, in that geography, and add them to our network. And so, if I'm going to go out and do that, or I'm going to have, some recruiters or, my teammates are going to go out and do that, it's really powerful if I can understand what the kind of going rate is for a common procedure for a gastroenterologist. That is going to be really useful. So I kind of know where I need to be as I'm, making an offer or approaching them. And so the provider that we've chosen here is biggest sort of gastroenterologist in Idaho, this Idaho Gastroenterology Associates. And we're just looking at colonoscopies. If you're a gastroenterologist, that's your kind of your bread and butter. And the numbers here are broken down by payer. So these are the four major payers. There's BCI, which is kind of local Blue Cross plans, Regents, regular General Blue Cross of Idaho, and Cigna. And you might wonder, why are there multiple numbers under a single pair? These are each different plans. So this is our kind of breakdown of the negotiated rates for colonoscopies for these payers with this provider. And this is drawn right from those files. So we didn't sort of make inferences here. We didn't have to draw conclusions or give an aggregate or sort of roll it up. These are the real numbers. So that's kind of the power of the Gigasheet approach is we can work with the full data set, the full picture, and we just let you zoom in to exactly the perspective that's going to be powerful or helpful to you in your business. So here we are, we're looking at the exact rates for this procedure for this provider. And so now from here, I really can get a pretty clear sense. So you can kind of see the range of numbers. We have Cigna coming in on the low end, at 310, and then the kind of bulk of them around 600, 500, and then, up to maybe this one with a particular plan at 779. So I kind of know, this is how I know where I stand. I know where I stand now. So if I want to come right in the middle of the pack, I know how to do that. If I want to, try to aim for, on the lower side, or if I, what's my high end, I really can get a sense of where I stand by looking at these precise numbers that I get back for a particular provider. So this is a nice nugget, and you could imagine doing this for other providers, or maybe you want to look at all providers in taxonomy. You can kind of pivot out from here in whatever way, but this would be a nice sort of landing spot and say, okay, now I kind of have a good perspective on the low end and the high end and the bulk of where it is. And, now we can sort of go out and have these conversations. So that would be an example of a landing point and a nice sort of golden nugget that you've taken out of this data. So now what I'll do is we're going to kind of unpack this. So here's where we landed, and I'm going to show you how we would kind of get to this. And that process could be something that we do for you, could be something we do with you, where we kind of show you if you wanted to be able to adapt it on your own, or it could be something where we kind of pre-bake it and then give you, a nice data export or whatever. So again, that sort of partnership aspect. Well, we're kind of making the data that you need that's going to be relevant for you.
One
So here's our
point
landing point. Go ahead.
One point I just add here is you're right. Like this is a great demonstration, but look, in reality, sometimes it's not as clean. Like just the other day, we were looking at some data in here for a different use case, and under the Medicare percentage column, you would see in some cases we'll see like very low percentage or like 1,000%. And one of the things that also is easy to throw out outliers like that. So by rolling it up and then being able to drill down to every cell, every row, every detail, you can kind of start to really zero in and get the gold out of this, as Garth was saying. So even like that column there looks fine here. Cigna's coming in at just over 100% of Medicare, which does seem pretty low. But one of the ways that you can cut it is like, all right, we're not really interested in people who, or payer files where they say it's thousands of percent. And likewise, we're not interested in people, for whatever reason, the data may say 2% of Medicare or something, we can throw those out.
That's right. And that
Sorry.
really illustrates the importance of having those multiple ingredients that we were talking about before. If you just have the rate files, you can still get these numbers, but there may be things in there that don't really make sense. And you can kind of see that when you put in the other ingredients to kind of give you that perspective. So, yeah, that's again another way where we kind of bring it all together and having it all in one place, one big spreadsheet. That's kind of our approach to the whole problem is put it in one big spreadsheet. But the key thing is, if you have those other kind of reference points in there, it'll enable you to get better answers. So great point from Jason. Okay, so here was kind of our landing point at the end. So let's show the process that again we could do with you, or you could do, in the product to kind of arrive at this point. And the starting point for the whole thing is just the plain rows. So these are, and again, this is not, I wouldn't call it the sort of the raw data, the raw data are those crazy JSON files, huge sizes, and so on and so on. So a lot of work has already gone in to bring us to this point where we have rows where each row here is a valid uh, data point, a valid rate data point. And this is kind of our starting point for getting to the insight. So we've done the sort of the cleaning work has brought us here. And from here, we can do the analysis work to get to those insights. And so I'm coming in from the network development perspective. I want to understand the main gastro provider. Like, let's check out, the rates and get a sense for the common procedure. So we're going to start by zooming in to that provider. And we've got 200 million, 206 million rows to start with. So let's start by zooming in to that provider. Now, I did a little work with this data to come up with their employer identification number. I can talk about what went into that afterwards, but for now, for this demo, we're going to just take it as a given that we're coming in with that number. I can tell you how I got to that from this data, but we'll start with that number. So we're going to take the column here, that's the EIN column, and we're just going to plop in their EIN and start this process of kind of zooming in to the point of interest. So we're down to 487,000 rows. That's still quite a few, more than we want. So our next zoom in step here is going to be to look at a particular billing code of interest. And like I mentioned, if you're gastro, this is colonoscopy is probably your bread and butter. So we're going to go with that. Um, so I have that number handy. You may, somewhat, depending on your workflow, you may know some of those numbers off the top of your head. We do also have a built-in assistant where you can ask questions like that, or you can always, Google's pretty good too. But we have it sort of sitting in the side here. So, but you may know, you may come in and kind of know the things that you see day in and day out. So, um, that's our next zoom in step is to look at a particular code. Now you might think, well, I've got the provider, I've got the code, is this like, why are there still 1,400 rows where there's all kinds of crazy stuff still to come? But let's take a pause here and let's just make sure that we think we're looking at, the right place. So we'll just take a look at some of these names here and like this Mark DeLoglio guy. So let's just make sure that he's actually showing up over here for these providers. Good. All right. So there he is. So that's a nice confirmation. And our other check could be, we'll just check the cities and we'll do a quick roll up. That answer that I showed at the end also had a roll up. So we're going to get there also with those numbers, but we'll do a quick roll up, call it a group on the city. So they have three, Nampa, Boise, Meridian, and we can check that too. Let's just make sure that they are practicing in those locations. Perfect. So we've got Boise, Meridian, Nampa. So that's kind of a good, you want to do these kind of checks along the way, and because sometimes there are strange things in the data. So this is a good kind of checkpoint. Just say, okay, we really do have probably some real data about this real practice. This is just their website, right? There's nothing. So that's a good
What
kind of checkpoint.
what Garth just showed obviously is very manual and is a great sort of sanity check on it. But one of the things that's cool about Gigasheet is it's really easy to join in outside data sets, whether that's a data set that you have maybe in your CRM or database, or it's your network of data, or it's data that sometimes we help our clients purchase. So, for example, one of our partners provides data for all of LinkedIn, basically in a structured format. So you can enrich this information. So if you wanted to do what Garth just did, but say you needed to do it for thousands or hundreds of thousands of providers, there are different approaches that we might take there where you want to fetch data in mass. But obviously, just a spot check, what he did is perfectly acceptable.
Yeah, and these kind of things, whether you're checking in bulk with if you have another data set to cross-reference, that's a powerful tool. Or if you're just checking a number here and there, those are the kind of things that you want to do as you go along to kind of make sure that you're on the right path. And that's kind of an important part of the analysis process that we would do. So, okay, so we kind of give ourselves confidence. We're looking at some real data points about this provider. So the next thing we're going to do is even within this set of 1,403 rate data points, many of them are still probably not going to be relevant for what we're trying to do. Because what we want to understand is kind of the base case, the regular scenario. And in these files, there will be many data points that are valid. So meaning there is a real contracted rate that has, that particular number, but it has some variation. So there's a lot of kind of toggles and aspects that are, that's just sort of the real reporting in this data that may not be relevant for a particular use case. So an example is these modifiers. So the modifier billing code can come with modifiers, and there may be scenarios where you want a particular one because you care about procedures done in a certain way, or another example of the place of service, you care about them done in a certain location. So, that's not data that we would discard. We do want you to have access to the full picture, but for a given scenario that you're trying to understand, an insight you're trying to get to, probably there's some more specifics that we want to apply here. So I'm going to add four more filters that are really all just about getting down to kind of that base case or the most standard case for this billing code for this provider. So let's do that. The first one, we're going to use that Medicare benchmark as our first kind of filter for these sort of making it the standard case. Um, these CMS rates, they're published, but they only publish for certain combinations of billing codes and modifiers. And so this is a nice way to say, look, if there's no benchmark, if there is no Medicare benchmark for this, maybe that's not something we want to look at for this kind of base case investigation. So that's going to be our first filter to apply there. The next one is from the rates themselves. There's different types of rates that they report, and we're going to take the two sort of standard ones, which is the fee schedule or negotiated rates. So we don't want sort of these percentage rates or other kinds. So that's our next kind of get it to the standard case filter. Next up, we're going to look at a particular place of service. So we're going to have office locations, which is going to be three codes in here. And again, this is something where you may just sort of know these off the top of your head, or you may want to ask the assistant, or this is something that we could set up for you. And then last one is that modifiers, we are going to say no modifiers. So again, we're kind of aiming for the base case here.
So quick clarification, office code is 11, and I believe 21, 22, and 24 hospitals, ambulatory surgical centers. Just
Good point. Good clarification.
yep.
There you go. See, they even, it's a good point. Yeah. So we want to aim for the the surgical center visits. So that's right. Okay. So we've got our sort of down to the base case filters, and let's see what that brings us to in terms of our row count. So here's our empty modifiers, and we're down to 102. And at this point, I think we could say, this is probably our real set of rates. We kind of got down to the provider, the billing code, and then this sort of standard, the bread and butter case, the run-of-the-mill everyday case with those last filters. So now the only thing left to do is kind of do our roll-ups. You could, at this point, you even could just sort of skim, if you wanted to just kind of skim the numbers, you could do that too. There's only 102 rows. But I think one of the nice things in Gigasheet is these roll-ups where it's really easy to just kind of give yourself some bins. And so that's going to be our last step here. So we're going to use the group capability, and we're going to group it first by the payers on the outside, and then within that, the rate values themselves. And that's going to bring us right back to that kind of gold nugget, that answer that we started with, where we have the different rates for the payers for this particular procedure and provider. So that's kind of the walkthrough. Again, you wouldn't necessarily have to do that. We could do this work. We can give you exports that are subsets or things like that. We are your partner, and we'll work with you to give, whatever's going to be most impactful for you. But that's to show kind of what this data is like and how, we might work with this data together with you. That's kind of, what the walk looks like. And then from here, again, you could still get to the underlying rows. Those are always present. The raw data, the processed clean data is available to you, and you could pivot out. So maybe you want to look at, tiers. You want to say, do these people work somewhere else, like that example on the slide? Maybe you want to go broader and look at everybody in this particular taxonomy, or maybe you want to contrast with a second billing code. Lots of ways to kind of pivot and go further. But I think we'll leave our story there for today. And I'll turn it back over to Jason for final thoughts, and then I think we can take some questions.
Yep. No, thanks for taking us through that, Garth. We're happy to answer any questions at this point. I see there were a couple that came in on the Q&A, and we'll come to those in just one second. I think obviously we're not shy about doing a live demo on this data, and this is like 206 million rows of data just in Idaho, but you could do this across, nationwide data sets or slices for particular clinical focus area or regions, multiple states, et cetera. So thanks for taking us through that. So in the Q&A panel, I have seen a couple of questions here. One simple one, an easy one that I will take because it's easy. Is a recording going to be made available of this? We get that question, I think, every time. Yes, we will be making a recording available, and you will receive that via email. Let's see. Here's a question, actually. This one for you, Garth, is about our API. So it was like, what is entailed with your API? Is it used to push data or pull data from Gigasheet? Maybe I'll let you take that and
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a very full-featured API, and the bottom line of our API is that anything that you see done in our user interface in the product, we can do with API, and that includes getting data in, joining data, analysis actions like what was on the screen during the demo today. So really, anything that is possible in the product by hitting buttons is also possible with an API call. So depending on the level of technical capabilities within your organization, that can be an extremely powerful tool for, sort of developing a business workflow. So if you have automations that you're running, that could help you do recruitment processes or other business processes, we are very well positioned to hook right in there. And, we have other customers that sort of work with our API like that. But it's not required. So, if you do not run your own sort of tech team and you want to work with it on a more sort of, user interface level, or if you have a tool and you want us to do the sort of technical side of dumping it into a tool, all those options are available. But we do have a really full-featured API, and in general, anything that is possible with clicking buttons in the user interface, we can do that with API calls, including bringing data in, which wasn't on the demo today. But yep, absolutely. The answer is yes.
Here's another question, which I can take. How do you differentiate with other price transparency data providers? I think it's a fair question. The data's public, it's out there, anyone can get it. I think the trick is working with it, distilling it down, curating it, and getting to these ground truth answers. I've seen some websites where it's like you type in a CPT code and you just get a rate. And I'm very suspect of that because having been, Garth walked us through this data, there are lots of different attributes to account for, right? Like, what if you're in the office versus an ER, right? There are different rates often for that, depending on the code. And I think everyone is trying to create this like simple, easy button. And we also are working on that. And actually, I'll plug our next webinar in August is on AI and how we're using that to come up with simpler paths to get to answers. But I think you always want to be able to see all of the information, the sources that it came from. We didn't really talk about, I don't think you did, maybe I missed it, but you can see the exact name of the file that this came from. So if someone's questioning this, we can always drill back to the exact like JSON file, when it was published, who published it, and where. It's all in this data, and I think particularly when it comes to doing artificial intelligence or even just a dashboard on top of it, like you need to be able to get down to that level of detail. You also need to be able to aggregate it up to see answers for like a whole market, region, and then zoom into, like in this case, a particular group or EIN. So at I guess I would say flexibility and in our interface, and then being able to quickly zoom out to the, you know, look at 200,000, or sorry, 200 million different rates, and like drill down to the 102 elements that you want to look at, and then be able to pull back out and look at, maybe a different zip code or a different geography within the data set.
Just want to add
Um,
on to that, because my background is in data science. I'm like a data guy all the time. So I just to add on to that question about the differentiation, it always drives me nuts personally when somebody is presenting the one number, but I know that there were a lot of data points behind that because I always wonder like which number did you choose? How did you choose the number that you're giving me? And do I agree? Am I going to agree? If you were to tell me how you chose that number, is it an average? Did you include things in the average that are not really real? So that's something that I think, it's important to think about that when you're getting, somebody else's rolled up output. If you're not a partner in that process, it's hard to really feel like you understand what that number really means. And so I think to me, that's the biggest difference is that always with Gigasheet, we have the full, all valid points are available here. And we can distill it down, but that'll be in partnership with you. So it'll come to a number where you understand what we're doing and what that means. Um, and these four filters that we did in that demo, that brought us from 1400 to 100 data points. That's a 10x reduction. And if somebody's making those choices for you and not kind of, if you don't know what's going on there, then you're not really sure what the number means. So that's to me, that's the biggest difference is we always have the full picture available. And if we do come to a distilled output, that'll be in partnership with you.
yeah, absolutely. We create benchmarks and metrics as well, but not to cliche overuse transparency, but it's very transparent, like how we arrive at that. And that's not always the case. I'd say speed is probably another one. You saw the responsiveness here working on 200 million rows of data across about 30 columns. It's quite speedy. So I think our infrastructure is key as well. Those are some of the highlights. And then, we're really aggressively positioned in the market just because we feel like we are very efficient at processing this data, which leads to this question, which I will try to answer here is how do you price? Which we have been asked before. Generally, we don't like get into it in a public forum because it depends, right? There's different situations, but generally speaking, the way it works is based on the amount of data that you need to access and process and draw from. So, as you might imagine, if you're going to do everything nationwide, the price is different than if you're just looking at gastroenterology nationwide versus I'm just looking at like everything in Idaho. So uh, feel free to reach out to us, and our team can drop us an email at sales@gigasheet.com. Happy to have those conversations and be pretty upfront with you about that. We feel pretty confident on our ability to deliver there. Um, let's see, we sort of already answered this question. If you have other questions, please put them in the Q&A panel. I think we will, or you can also put them in the chat. I think we will leave it there. The next month in August, we're having a webinar on artificial intelligence and how we're applying that to price transparency and healthcare and big data in general. If that is of interest to you, keep an eye out for that. We'll post it on our website and in our newsletters. Again, if you're interested, making sure you want to join that, just drop us an email at sales@gigasheet.com or reply to the email that you're going to get with this recording. So with that, thank you very much for joining, and have a great day. Thanks, Garth. Good job.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya.